Hi everyone, my name's Brian Tierney. I'm coming to you from my living room here in Oakland, California. I'm reading a poem today from the Paris Review archives for the Poets on Couches reading series. I've chosen James Wright's Heraclitus, so I'll be reading that. Heraclitus. My beautiful America, vast in its brutality and brutal in its vastness. All the way from Paris to Vienna takes less time to find than all the way from New York to Pittsburgh, where Duquesne University had a beautiful football team when I was a boy. One evening beside the river, only its name, only one river, the Ohio, that is the loneliest river in the world. Patsy DeFranco sank down into the time of the river and stayed. Joe Bumbico jumped naked into the suckhole and dragged up Harry Schultz. I started to cry. The cop gouged his fists into Harry's kidneys. He must have thought they were lungs. Harry couldn't talk plain. Harry puked. I loved Harry. He was one of my best friends. Harry, are you still alive? Who, me? I ain't not. I swam all the way across the Ohio River with my friends alone. Me and Junior and Elwood and Shamba and Crumb. We made it all the way across to West Virginia. I was only a boy. I swam all the way through a tear on a dead face. America is dead, and it is the only country I had. Harry, are you still alive? So, I chose this poem partly because I'd never read it before, and I've read a lot of Wright. So that kind of drew my attention. I also chose it because it mentions initially Duquesne University, which is where I went to undergrad when I lived in Pittsburgh for about 10 years before I moved here to the West Coast. And so for those reasons alone, I was kind of drawn to the poem. But once I got there, it just seemed really relevant to me, Wright, he's expressing, a seemingly profound kind of despair at the failed American project. And he's also expressing a kind of elegiac bewilderment, both of which seem, really relevant to this moment, And so I was drawn into the mood of the poem in that way. And, I think when we think about Wright, we think about the poet of kind of the sublime, the very intimate, personal encounter with nature. And he certainly is that poet, predominantly, I think. But Wright is also a poet, and we sometimes forget this, who really did account for history, and historicity. And he really did engage in a kind of social witness at times, and his poems, and I think this is one of those expressions, often, focus on a localized kind of fatalism, that involves the intersections of time and place, and how those times and places and those specific confluences swallow people and their lives. And I think that has something to do with why he is focusing on the Ohio River here, which the title nods to, the weeping philosopher. Heraclitus also, is famously known for the phrase, no man ever steps in the same river twice. And he is known for, the philosophy of kind of, opposing momentums, flux. And so there's a way in which it makes sense, that signals an interest in the river and and the kind of position that Wright finds himself in between the past and the present. And, the Ohio River is really important, and as a place, it is, if you don't know, it's a significant part of the history of industry in America, and that is the confluence of the Monongahela and the Allegheny Rivers that skirt Pittsburgh. And, I think Wright is choosing this river and focusing on it specifically because, it's involved in the machinery of capitalism, as Pittsburgh was, a place that made so much. I mean, it made skyscrapers, but it also made war possible. I mean, Pittsburgh was involved in the machinery of capitalism and a lot of the kind of nefarious energies of America. And, this poem is interested in expressing, to me, personal and cultural pasts. And I think that Wright is a poet who's extremely interested in personal and cultural pasts and the order of things behind things. And there's a way in which, he sees the pain of being alive in America. And, this river is a location that, if we think about historically, and the context of the people who worked in the steel mills of Pittsburgh, it's a place that swallowed people, and much like the river just keeps going, America kind of takes what it needs and goes, and that's what happened. Pittsburgh was a place where, the working class, the laboring class of the 19th and 20th century, gave their lives for industry, for essentially corporate interests, proto-corporate interests, and then when they got what they needed, they left a shell of a place. And the legacy of that working life kind of ended up meaning nothing. And Wright is very much aware of that. And so, he says, Patsy DeFranco fell into the time of the river, that this river represents something about the confluences of Americanness. And I think, in a way, Wright is expressing that profound despair at, the failed American project, that it's not what it seems, that this place is vast in its brutality, brutal in its vastness, that it's a place that is physically uncontainable, and the narrative of this place and the ways in which it tries to make a kind of legible coherency and unity of history also is untenable, that it's not real, that it's not what it seems to be. And, at the end, he's wondering, Harry, are you still alive? Did you make it? Did you survive? And there's this sense that people don't survive. They get stuck in their place. They get sucked into the time of the river, as we as people in America get sucked into our positions a lot of the time. And so for me, it felt like Wright, one of those Wright instances where he really is bearing witness, to a social context and a social history. And he's limited, of course, by his race and class and his time period and how he bears social witness, but he is doing that. And, for me, Wright was one of those poets who really did teach me that an aesthetics needs an ethics, that we need to be aware that we are writing from within a society and a history and a positionality. And, along with, Merwin and Oppen and more personally and more, contemporarily, Solmaz Sharif, he's one of the early poets who teaches me the importance of understanding that positionality and that whether we think we are or not, we're writing from that place.